Okay, so one of the first questions I wanted to ask is to have you explain the difference between conservatism and far right culture.
Yeah, I can try my best. I will say that this is like a distinction that even in the broader literature, I think is a tough distinction to make. I think, the way that I think about it, though, first is that both categories need to be situated geographically and historically. Conservatism and the far right, I think, are useful categories, but they mean really different things in the United States as they do in Europe, as they do in China, as they do in India. And so I think the first thing, and when we're talking about these categories, is to be pretty culturally specific. Because what matters to, I think, conservatism is a commitment to the status quo in many ways. In the United States context, I think there are many ways in which the center left, mainstream Democrats even,
Yeah.
are quite conservative, actually.
Yeah,
If you sort of step
totally.
back and let our partisan identifications and identities dissolve a little bit, there are a lot of ways in which Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton especially are deeply conservative figures and are sort of oriented towards upholding whatever social order exists now. So that's how I sort of think about conservatism. There are touchstones in this sort of ideological canon. Edmund Burke is often pointed to as a figure that's important to conservatism, a sort of sincere conservatism that's, you know, slow, slow change, tradition, sort of humble politics. And I think when you think about the far right or radical right or extreme right, I think the first thing that comes to mind in contrast to conservatism, which is a politics of stasis, is just a politics of change. And when we think about something like the second Trump administration, well, the first as well, but what the MAGA movement has become, I mean, it is a politics of change. There are a lot of things that they would like to change. And the question, in distinguishing between conservative and far right is just like, okay, are these people looking to switch the social order in some way? If so, then they might be far right. And then the question is, are they on the right? And it's sort of like, yeah, they seem to be on the right. So I think it's totally fair to call the current MAGA coalition a
Yeah.
far right movement. And another good example, I think, is, what I think people often refer to as fascism in early 20th century Europe. Nazism is different, but like Nazism itself was a very, in some ways, progressive movement at the time. It was change oriented. It was about a new vision for the social order, as was Mussolini's fascism in Italy. And so if you're dealing with a politics of change, um, for me at least, I will say, people will disagree with this, you're not dealing with conservatism. You're dealing with something else. That something else could be a lot of things. It could be far right. It could be far left. It could be some other
Right.
thing.
Right. Right.
Stasis versus change.
Awesome. That's so helpful.
And one thing I'd say, yeah, it's weird. I think it all this is infinitely fascinating for me and also complicated
Yeah.
because right now, if you look at the MAGA coalition, you can say, yeah, it is a politics of change for sure. But when you think about the kinds of change at play, for me, there are two really distinct, uh, almost like imaginaries at play. There's on one hand an imaginary that is much more related to a Nazi imaginary, which is this nostalgic, a sort of conservative nostalgic revolution. So there's a part of the MAGA coalition that I think imagines this sort of like, you know, the American chestnut will return and like the nuclear family will return. And then, of course, there is the totally unrelated winds of change that are extremely future oriented in the form of Elon Musk wanting to build a new society on Mars and Peter Thiel and the rest of the tech bros trying to imagine new forms of technologically driven futuristic societies. Both of those are far right in
Right.
the sense that they are pro change and, in my estimation, super pro hierarchy, super pro inequality, but they're different. One's driven by nostalgia, it's a change of nostalgia, and the other is driven by a change of sort of futurism. And So within even sort of, there's conservatism, which is sort of stasis within the far right. There is a politics of change, but within that politics of the far right, there is this really important cleavage right now between this sort of politics of nostalgia and this politics of futurism. And I think we see that play out in the United States like literally every day.